Have you ever wondered what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? What occurs when the jester, armed with the biting sword of nightly ridicule, decides to aim his sharpest barbs not at a fleeting politician or a vapid celebrity, but at the very bedrock of a nation's law? This isn't a hypothetical question. It's the story of how one of television's most powerful voices was silenced, not by network executives or dwindling ratings, but by a quiet, deliberate man who wields the gavel and the weight of the Constitution itself. This is the story of the night Jimmy Kimmel, the king of late-night comedy, took on John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and lost everything. Imagine a world where a single perfectly calibrated speech could unravel a media empire. A world where the carefully constructed persona of a beloved entertainer built over 2 decades and thousands of hours of television could be dismantled in under 10 minutes. It sounds like fiction, but the embers of this confrontation still glow in the hushed corridors of Washington, D.C. and the stunned boardrooms of Hollywood. We will journey back to the evening that started with laughter and ended in a deafening silence, a silence that would soon consume an entire television program. We will dissect the words, the tension, and the chilling precision of a takedown so complete it didn't just end a segment, it ended an era. The setting for this collision of worlds was not a television studio or a courtroom, but the grand ballroom of the Renaissance Washington, D.C. hotel. The occasion was the annual Gridiron Club and Foundation Dinner, a century-old tradition where the nation's most powerful figures in politics and journalism gather for an evening of satirical skits and speeches, a temporary truce where rivals can roast one another under the guise of good fun. The year was 2024, a period of profound national division. The air in America was thick with a palpable tension, a sense that the very fabric of civil discourse was tearing at the seams. Every news cycle felt like a lurching ride on a roller coaster, and the Supreme Court, once seen as an institution above the political fray, had found itself at the epicenter of the storm following a series of deeply polarizing 5-4 decisions. Jimmy Kimmel, flown in from his Hollywood castle on the West Coast, was the night's star comedic speaker. For him, this was more than just a gig, it was an opportunity. His show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, had evolved from its more zany man-on-the-street origins into a potent platform for liberal advocacy. His monologues, once focused on pop culture, now regularly dissected political headlines with a surgeon's precision and a comedian's venom. His audience loved him for it. They saw him as a voice of reason and sanity, in a world gone mad, a champion who used his wit to fight back. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, Kimmel had made the Supreme Court, and specifically its conservative wing, a recurring target. He saw them as unelected ideologues, cloaked in black robes, and he felt it was his duty to expose what he perceived as their hypocrisy. He arrived in D.C., feeling confident, even righteous. In his mind, he was David preparing his slingshot for Goliath. Across the cavernous room, seated at the head table, was Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. If Kimmel was a man who thrived in the spotlight, Roberts was a man who embodied institutional shadow. His public persona was one of meticulous caution and unwavering devotion to the integrity of the court. He was a product of a different America, a man who believed in process precedent and the quiet dignity of the judiciary. He had spent years trying to steer the court through the treacherous waters of partisan politics, often acting as a swing vote to the immense frustration of both the right and the left. He had witnessed the protests outside the Supreme Court building just a mile away from where he now sat. He had read the increasingly vitriolic commentary and had felt the mounting pressure on the institution he was sworn to protect. He was a man carrying an immense burden, a deep-seated worry for the country's faith in its own system of justice. He was not here tonight for a fight. He was here to honor a tradition, to perhaps share a moment of levity in a capital city that had forgotten how to laugh with itself. He was, in essence, a scholar and a jurist attending a party of jesters and scribes, his mind occupied by matters of constitutional weight, not comedic timing. The air conditioning hummed, but a different kind of chill was beginning to settle over the proceedings. The evening began as expected. The wine flowed. The skits performed by journalists in costume were gently mocking. A Republican senator delivered a self-deprecating speech, followed by a Democratic governor who did the same. The laughter was polite, a release valve for the city's accumulated pressure. Then the president of the club introduced Jimmy Kimmel, A wave of applause, genuine and expectant, filled the ballroom. Kimmel approached the podium, a familiar smirk playing on his lips. He looked out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns, a collection of the most influential people on the planet. For the first 15 minutes, he was masterful. He skewered politicians on both sides of the aisle with clever, well-crafted jokes that hit their mark without drawing blood. He had the room in the palm of his hand. Then he shifted his gaze. It landed directly on the head table and on the placid face of the Chief Justice. "It's an honor to be here." Kimmel began, his tone changing, acquiring a sharper edge. "Though I have to say it's a little intimidating to be telling jokes in front of a group that has done more to ruin comedy than anyone else. I'm talking, of course, about the Supreme Court." A nervous titter went through the audience. It was the first joke of the night that felt less like a roast and more like an accusation. Kimmel pressed on a prosecutor laying out his case. He brought up a recent highly contentious ruling on environmental regulations. "The EPA, you guys took that one on. Apparently you felt the experts didn't have enough legal degrees. So now I guess we're just going to let we the people decide on carbon emissions. My cousin Barry, who thinks climate change is a hoax, started by the Chinese to sell more solar-powered hats, now has as much say as a scientist with 30 years of research. So thank you for that, Justice Roberts. Barry is thrilled." The camera feeds in the room showed Roberts. He wasn't smiling. His expression was a blank slate of judicial neutrality, yet his eyes were fixed on Kimmel, unblinking. The escalation was methodical. Kimmel moved from policy to personality. "You know the Chief Justice is known for his love of history and tradition?" Kimmel continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Which makes sense, because some of your recent decisions seem to have been written on parchment with a quill pen right next to a note that says, 'Don't forget to buy more leeches for the sick.' It's 2024. We have phones that can identify any song in 2 seconds, but we have a court that's still trying to figure out what James Madison meant when he was, churning his own butter." The room was now noticeably colder. The laughter was sparse, replaced by the uncomfortable shuffling of chairs. The journalists in the room were scribbling furiously. This had ceased to be a roast. It was an assault. The final turn of the screw was the most direct. Kimmel leaned into the microphone. "People say the court shouldn't be political. I agree. But you can't make decisions that affect every aspect of our lives, from who we can marry to what we can do with our own bodies, and then hide behind a black robe and say, 'No comment.' That's not justice. That's power. And it's our job, my job, to call it out." He paused for effect, letting the accusation hang in the air like smoke. "So thank you for your service, Justice Roberts. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to let the adults back in the room." With that, he concluded his speech. The applause was scattered, uncertain. Kimmel had gambled that his celebrity and righteous anger would carry the day. He had miscalculated. The tradition of the dinner called for a humorous rebuttal from a member of the opposing party or institution. As the president of the Gridiron Club moved to the podium to navigate the awkward transition, a hand was raised at the head table. It was John Roberts. A hush fell over the entire ballroom. He slowly pushed his chair back, walked to the podium, and adjusted the microphone. The immovable object was about to respond. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that precedes either a verdict or a detonation. John Roberts stood at the podium, not with the swagger of a politician or the frantic energy of a comedian, but with the profound stillness of a man who has spent his life weighing words. He looked out at the audience, his gaze sweeping past the powerful figures until it rested for just a moment on Jimmy Kimmel. There was no anger in his eyes, no hint of insult. There was something far more unnerving, a deep, scholarly disappointment. "Thank you." Roberts began, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the biting sarcasm that had just filled the hall. "Mr. Kimmel, thank you for your observations. It is the cherished right of every American to criticize their government. It is a right that the men and women who serve on our courts, and indeed the institution I represent, are sworn to protect. It is a right you exercise nightly with great commercial success." The first sentence was a quiet thunderclap. It was not a defense, but a reframing. Roberts wasn't positioning himself as a victim. He was establishing his role as the ultimate guarantor of the very freedom Kimmel had just used to attack him. "You speak of power." Roberts continued, his tone, even his cadence, deliberate. "And you are correct. The Supreme Court does wield a form of power, but you fundamentally misunderstand its nature. The power of a comedian, Mr. Kimmel, is the power of the moment. It is the power to provoke, to mock, to elicit a laugh or a gasp. It is ephemeral, designed to be consumed and forgotten by the time the next day's monologue is written. It is loud, it is bright, and it is by its very nature fleeting. He paused, letting the distinction settle. The power of the judiciary is the opposite. It is not the power to create a fleeting emotional response. It is the responsibility to engage in a conversation that spans centuries. When we interpret the Constitution, we are not talking to you, Mr. Kimmel. Not directly. We are in a dialogue with Madison, with Hamilton, with Marshall. We are speaking to the judges who sat on the court 50 years ago, and we are attempting to frame principles that will speak to the judges who will sit on the court 50 years from now. It is a power defined not by its volume, but by its endurance. It is quiet, it is considered, and its goal is permanence. The air in the room was electric. This was no longer a rebuttal. It was a masterclass. Roberts had sidestepped the personal insults and the specific policy disagreements. He was elevating the entire conflict onto a different plane of existence, a place where Kimmel's weapons were useless. "You wield ridicule as a weapon," Roberts said, his gaze now locking with Kimmel's. "You suggest that because our reasoning does not align with your modern sensibilities, it is archaic and illegitimate. You mock the process of looking to history as if the past is a quaint irrelevance we should discard like last year's fashion. But our charge is not to be fashionable. Our charge is to be faithful. Faithful to a text. Faithful to a system of laws designed to prevent the very thing you seem to advocate for, a world where the loudest voice, the most popular opinion of the moment, becomes the supreme law of the land. That is not the rule of law. That is the rule of the crowd. It is the logic of the Roman arena, and it is the antithesis of a constitutional republic." He was not just defending the court. He was defending the foundational principles of Western law. Kimmel, for his part, sat frozen at his table. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned comprehension. He was a comedian who had brought a joke to a gunfight, only to find his opponent was not holding a gun, but was instead deconstructing the very science of ballistics. Then came the final devastating blow. Roberts's voice dropped slightly, becoming more intimate, more direct, as if speaking only to Kimmel. "You ended your speech by suggesting it is time for the adults to be back in the room. And here I must confess, I find my only point of agreement with you, for what you have done tonight in this room is the very embodiment of juvenility. You have mistaken loudness for leadership and mockery for moral clarity. You have used your considerable platform not to foster understanding, not to engage with complex ideas, not to enlighten your audience, but to caricature and to demean. You have, in essence, used your freedom of speech to cheapen the very concept of public discourse. And so the most profound irony of all is this. You stand here tonight on this stage in this city, and you attack the institution that guarantees your right to do so, all while demonstrating a profound lack of understanding of the responsibility that right entails. That is not adult behavior, Mr. Kimmel. It is the tantrum of an infant. The room is waiting for an adult. I suggest you look for one." Roberts finished. He did not slam the podium. He did not glower. He simply nodded, once turned and walked back to his seat with the same deliberate calm with which he had arrived. The silence that followed was not like the one before. It was a thick, crushing silence of a defeated army. No one clapped. Not immediately. They were too stunned. Then a slow, hesitant applause started from a corner of the room and grew not into a roaring ovation, but into a wave of solemn, respectful affirmation. Jimmy Kimmel just sat there under the bright lights, utterly and completely erased. The immediate aftermath was a study in contrasts. As Chief Justice Roberts resumed his seat at the head table, he picked up his water glass with a steady hand, a picture of unshakable composure. He had not delivered a speech. He had delivered a verdict. Across the ballroom, Jimmy Kimmel was a man imploding in plain sight. The color had drained from his face. The cameras, which had moments before been his allies, were now cruel, unblinking eyes, capturing his public diminishment. He offered a weak, forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. For the first time in his professional life, the man who always had the last word had absolutely nothing to say. The fallout began before the dinner even concluded. The raw video of Roberts's rebuttal, filmed on a dozen smartphones, hit the internet like a lightning strike. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a cultural event. The hashtags #, Roberts' rebuttal and "How's the adult in the room" trended globally for the next 48 hours. The speech was parsed and analyzed not just on cable news, but in academic journals and legal blogs. It was hailed as a landmark defense of judicial philosophy and a masterclass in rhetoric. Commentators from across the political spectrum, from the Wall Street Journal to The Atlantic, praised Roberts' gravitas and intellectual firepower. They contrasted his sober, principled stand with what was now being universally framed as Kimmel's cheap, ill-conceived, and deeply personal attack. For Kimmel and his network ABC, the damage was catastrophic. His brand was built on being the witty, relatable guy who could speak truth to power. But Roberts had masterfully reframed him as a powerful man childishly punching down at an institution he didn't comprehend. The core of his appeal had been shattered. By Monday morning, the real crisis began. Major advertisers, the lifeblood of any network show, started to make quiet calls to their ABC representatives. A leading luxury automaker, a global financial services firm, and a high-end technology company, brands that invest billions in cultivating an image of seriousness and prestige, expressed their deep concern about being associated with a host who had been so thoroughly and publicly delegitimized. They weren't pulling their ads because of political pressure. They were pulling them because Kimmel was now a bad investment. His brand was no longer sharp social commentator. It was publicly humiliated. Behind the scenes at Disney, ABC's parent company, panic set in. The calculus was brutal and swift. The late-night slot was valuable, but Kimmel was now toxic. His audience, who had seen him as a fearless David, now had to grapple with the image of him being intellectually dismantled by Goliath. His power to persuade his core asset was gone. Continuing the show would mean nightly reminders of his humiliation. Within a week, after a series of tense closed-door meetings, the decision was made. ABC released a sterile corporate statement announcing that Jimmy Kimmel Live would be going on an indefinite hiatus to explore a new creative direction. It was a public relations euphemism for a quiet execution. The show was over. The lights of the El Capitan Entertainment Center on Hollywood Boulevard, where Kimmel had taped for over 2 decades, went dark. The message, the ultimate lesson drawn from the ashes of Kimmel's career, was profound and sobering. It served as a stark reminder that in the arena of public discourse, the power of a platform is not absolute. It comes with an implicit responsibility. The freedom to speak is not the freedom from consequence, and the weapon of ridicule, while effective against the arrogant and the foolish, shatters against the bedrock of true intellectual and institutional integrity. John Roberts did not cancel Jimmy Kimmel. He simply held up a mirror, and the reflection was so damning that the entire edifice Kimmel had built crumbled under the weight of its own hollowness. The true battle is not won by the person who shouts the loudest, but by the one who commands the argument. Words have power, but principled words have authority, and on that fateful night, the difference between the two became devastatingly clear. This entire saga leaves us with a critical question, one that extends far beyond the lives of a comedian and a jurist. In our hyper-connected world, where every voice can be amplified, what is the true measure of speaking truth to power? Is it found in the satisfying sting of a well-aimed insult, or in the more difficult, less glamorous work of reasoned debate and genuine understanding? When does commentary cease to be a tool for accountability and become an instrument of division, cheapening the very discourse it claims to elevate? Think about the platforms you follow, the voices you amplify. Are they building bridges of understanding, or are they simply profiting from the rubble of our disagreements? The story of John Roberts and Jimmy Kimmel is a powerful parable for our times. It's a lesson that true strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks in calm, measured tones that carry the weight of history and reason. It reminds us that while mockery can win a laugh, only wisdom can win the argument. If this story gave you pause, if it made you think about the nature of the words we use and the power they hold, then help us continue this conversation. Like this video, share it with someone who appreciates a deeper look into the forces that shape our world, and subscribe to the channel for more content that goes beyond the headlines. Let us know in the comments below. What do you believe is the ultimate responsibility of those with a public voice?